So my job is just going to be this morning is to, did it come up there?
Yes.
Great. It's just to tell you the story of the Columbia Future Forge, which was just an innovation experiment that I launched, because it ceased to be my idea the moment I shared it with other people. And you'll hear about that being one of the key steps when we talk about how to start any idea. And so this is the story of the Forge. So you heard a little bit. I've been doing youth ministry since I was 20 years old. Actually maybe 19. I don't know if those numbers are right. They're close enough. For quite a while. I started as a youth director when I was in college. I now am at the second church in an ordained capacity in Washington State. I live right across the river from Portland, Oregon. And have been there for 12 years. And prior to that, I'm going to take this off. I was in Northern California for 4 years after seminary at Princeton. I'm the executive director of the Columbia Future Forge. I'm still the associate pastor for youth and families at the church that I am at, Columbia Presbyterian Church. And I ended up in the corner of Christian social enterprise and innovation, neither of which I intended to do. I just intended to do youth ministry a bit better. And I love God, and I love seeing the kingdom break into the world. And that resulted in some innovation and an enterprise. I didn't even know social enterprise was a conversation until I called Kenda after having this idea bouncing around in my head 7 years ago. And I'm still a practitioner in the local church, and that's very important to me. My model is not designed to be a parachurch model. It's designed to exist within the life of a congregation, and continually I'm exploring how my role as minister actually matters to the way that ministry functions, both within the church and the ministry itself, but also out in public. It's really interesting to see the ways that changes interactions in actually mostly really positive ways. So what happened was when I moved to the Pacific Northwest, this is my house in Camas, Washington, what was a little mill town just to the east of Vancouver, Washington. I moved up from Northern California 12 years ago, and we had been absolutely hammered in terms of housing in the economic downturn. We lost our home in Northern California. And so it took about 3 years to figure out how to, if it was possible to get back into a house. And so we bought this little bitty, it was gray at the time, bankruptcy foreclosure, and this is where the idea began. I had to gut the entire house, rewire it with the help of some friends. And along the way, though you can't see it in this picture, I had to rebuild a single-car garage. It was a 1937 built house. And I started to, as I was remodeling the house, I recognized that youth ministry wasn't working for some of my students, particularly some that occupied different socioeconomic zones that my church did, which was mostly an upper-middle-class church. And I was just trying to figure out how to lengthen relationship with them and maintain it. And I thought, hey, if I pay them to work, I liked making money when I was a teenager, and I liked work. And so I started paying kids to help me gut the house and do other stuff. And eventually we started building this single-car garage, and some adults from the church began to show up with air compressors and 2x4s. And some of them were adults that had come on our work service trips, and they'd only see the kids once a year because they didn't help out in youth group in a particular way. And this is a way for them to reconnect with kids that they had spent a week with and cared about. And so we remodeled this house. And what happened was that I eventually just did some labor law research and realized that I couldn't really employ teenagers that way doing construction the way that I had been. And but I figured out that's a judge in my congregation said, yeah, you were doing it illegally. What I figured out was actually that I could, when I read teen labor law, I could do landscaping. You'll see in a second that's the direction I headed in. I have solution in parentheses up there. It's interesting because I don't think the models that you're going to see in cards or that Ken and I talk about are necessarily solutions in the way that we think about them. But I actually ended up looking up this word the other day because it was in my presentation, and I hate solutions because they almost never work. But the word solution, its root in Latin simply means to loosen. And I think that what this house did and this whole experience did was actually to loosen my imagination about what the church could be, and to loosen my church's imagination and individual people in my church's imagination about what it means to be a disciple of Christ. And so what really started shaking me loose was one season I had two students in my church that were from a town north of us. Some parent in our church started driving them in from 17 miles away to come to youth group, and then I'd have to drive them home every Sunday night. after youth group, and we'd have great conversations in the rides home. And 2 of them ended up getting baptized, in this case 2 boys. And I was dropping them off back in their town one night, and I had realized that I'm dropping one of them off to a trailer that had no running water. That particular teenager kind of smelled very musty when he would get in my car almost every week. And the other student I was dropping off lived with his grandma. He'd been abandoned by his parents, and his granddad had taken off a month before after winning a few $1,000s in the Washington State Lottery. And so here he was with his grandma that had ill health and everything else, and I'm driving down the gravel road back from one of their houses, and I'm like, what good does our ministry do for these students? What's going to happen to them in 2 years? Because most of what my care was devoted towards was the spiritual portion of their lives. Not that our whole life isn't spiritual, but and I really hadn't thought about the practical economics and does Jesus care about those. And James 2:16-18 flooded into my mind, which is, if I tell you to eat your fill and go in peace, but I do not put food in your stomach and clothing on your back, what good have I done you? And I realized that we needed to build a different kind of youth ministry, because it was not caring for the whole spectrum of teenagers' lives. It was really focused on a particular area and often a particular kind of kid. And so what sprang forth was, I read through the teen labor law, was that I could do landscaping. And so I decided that I was going to use my own money because I had heard that it was really difficult to set up a nonprofit. It's actually not that hard. So I was like, well, I can set up a for-profit really quickly. And so I did. I created Motown Teen Lawn Care, which was initially a for-profit landscaping company with some cash reserves I had and my own little vehicle and a church trailer, and had to ask the church for 4 to 8 hours a week to work on this. And to my utter amazement, they said yes. And so what happened, my initial goal, I launched it in 2015. Like I said, I just wanted to sort of mentor along the job site, maintain relationship with kids. In the fall of 2015, we started teaching some life skills. Those have always been important to me. You'll hear a little bit more later about why that is. And then we sort of formalized a series of trainings, and we started actually actively mentoring students and then assigning them mentors in the fall of 2016. The initial goals were just job skills and problem solving, because a thing I noticed when I observed teenagers was they struggled to do independent problem solving in a way that was perplexing and often frustrating to me. So I wanted to help them work on that through jobs. I thought jobs were a great way to do that. Wanted to get to 12 students. That was my goal. Just 12 students. If we get to 12 students, it would be a meaningful ministry in my mind. I wanted to test the new idea, test its sustainability. The church didn't want to fund it. And so I had to figure out, was there a way to keep it running without budget support other than the time they allocated for me to make it run. And I got permission from my elders. You'll hear more about that later. And I wanted to get onto school campuses to see if students in the community were interested in life skills and job skills and those kinds of things. This is my first student I hired, Ethan McLaughlin, and my first Motown employee. There's our church trailer, this metallic beast I was hauling behind a V6 Nissan Xterra. It's a miracle that the transmission did not explode. But it didn't. Other disasters happened, but that didn't happen. Over time, and by time I'm in year 7 now, so it's quite a bit of time, it grew. The Forge is what the entity is called now. It's an umbrella nonprofit. Motown still operates under it as a nonprofit now, though it does generate positive revenue. We are on campus at Alternative High School, actually more than one. And then I had a friend in the community come who had been a D1 girls softball coach who said, I want to start a weight program that's faith-based. And we cleared warehouse space in the church. It had a room about this size that was unoccupied, and he knew how to do strength training. And so we started Utmost Athletics, which now has 125 students working out a week in this gymnasium, all the way up to junior college students, which we never expected to be working with. So we have a school partnership where we teach character development at Hayes Freedom, the weight program, Motown Teen Lawn Care with, 60 paying customers on a weekly basis. Students come out on the weekends. Students pay a fee to join Utmost Athletics, but it's a sliding scale, what they can afford. And then recently we had a series of basketball teams from the community come in, mostly low-income kids with about 80 students that are wanting to form a life skills kind of partnership with us, but we haven't quite formulated that yet. And in the midst of all that, I managed to convince the church not to sell a manse. And we renamed it the Beacon House. We started housing the college athletes in there. And now they've just pivoted that, and they're housing my landscapers' families in that house as a way to build down payments for a home and things like that. So it's a ministry that sprung up recently to care for them while they're getting English lessons. Their kids are enrolled in our church preschool. Like, there's all these different levels of things that are going on in their lives, which we never expected to be doing. All of this grew very, very gradually over time. So some students are just a part of the Forge. Some, they get life skills in the mentoring there. Some of them, that's all they show up for. Other kids are in character development classes on campus at their high school. Some kids just come for the weights, but many of them will say they want the life skills as well, and then we'll assign them a mentor that's direct kind of one-on-one mentoring. That's the basic model that we run. We recruit students from local schools. We do 5 trainings: money management, professionalism. We do a personality profile, nonviolent communication, and personal goal setting over the course of the year, which is actually when I hate setting goals, but that's my favorite training because it gets us really deep into kids' lives really quickly, to what their defeats are and their wins are and their hopes are and things like that. We assign mentors to them. We do work site and coaching and classroom interactions. I think you've probably gathered that by now. And we coach the mentors on working well with the students and try to gather them for some community as well, so that we're developing them. They're really what our program stands and falls on. And we try to include the students in the life of the church if they want to be. Some of them have come on church trips and things like that. Yes?
I'm so sorry, I'm slow.
That's okay.
Can you say again what you're training in?
Yeah, we do personal goal setting, money management, professionalism, conflict resolution. Yeah, nonviolent communication, conflict resolution, and did I say personality profile?
Yes.
Yeah. And then we also do a culminating, what we call our Last Supper as well, which celebrates the interactions they're having with their mentors. So it's really 6, I guess, but that's not skills training. And we have some other second tiers that we do in each one of those that they engage in as well if they go back through the program. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe you're going to do this, but could you explain how you connect with the school?
Yeah, people always ask that. And it's actually was a lot easier than I thought. It turns out that if you're a church and you actually come on campus with something that matters to the schools, their barriers go down really quickly. So they care about all the things that we care about, and as long as we understand the boundaries between church and state, then we're okay. And so most of the time, if I've gone in and explained, well, here's the things that we're here to do. My wife's a school teacher. My mom was, and my sister is. I understand those boundaries pretty well. I explain that to them. I give them my educational background so they know that I'm not coming on campus as a bad actor, which they sometimes have with people of faith. It's been easy. They really haven't. They feel like many of them want allies in the community. In fact, the schools often are their own worst enemy in that regard. But once they figure out what we're trying to do, they've been really comfortable. And the Pacific Northwest, that's not a small thing. It's a pretty anti-institutionalized religion place. So it's been remarkable. So it hasn't really been an issue, to my utter surprise.
You go on campus and give classes, like after school?
Yeah, during class, actually. So like at the alternative school, our job is I had to develop a whole curriculum around character development this year. So I did 16 weeks, an hour and a half on Mondays with all of their freshmen, basically doing character development. And I really don't like character development, but that's what they wanted. I tend to like focusing on other things, and it's not because I don't like developing character, but I just find that like sometimes churches that do those kind of programs, it's really terrible. And so it was the last thing that I wanted to design curriculum for, but that's what they wanted. And if we're there to serve, that's what they feel that they need. So I went out and found some terrible curriculum and redid it. It's not really theologically based, although my theological frameworks undergird everything I do. And they know that, the schools know that, but as long as I'm not hitting kids, front on with that, it's okay.
And you are you the only one who goes, or you have?
No, we have 5 other adults from our church that go. All of those are church members. Not all of my mentors are necessarily church people or church members. Yeah, they volunteer.
Okay.
And they come on, and then they do small groups in that case. It's not one-on-one, it's like 1-on-4 or 1-on-5. And in fact, I'm just starting to do some reading talking about that 1-on-4, 1-on-5 relationships may in fact be better than 1-on-1. And so we're actually rethinking parts of our model around that. It would be much better to do it that way overall. But anyway, so that's the basic model. Sorry, I'm probably taking too long here. This is one of our kids when they get a job. I got the church to give us permission to spray paint a hammer and anvil on the side of the church building. So the kids sort of get to tag the building every time they got a job. So it's almost like football helmet stickers or something. As one of our students, Keith. This is the inside of the gym that we built. By the time we did this, I had a good sense of what resources were available in the community, so that I was like, oh yeah, we can bootstrap 50 grand. We can come up with that. That's been a thing that loosened in my mind, was the concept of money and fundraising and other things that have drastically changed. Even what's available out in the community and what's actually available within my church has been radically transformed by this. I think there's way more resources than we realize we have if the right idea is there for people to be impassioned about it. We had to rebuild that entire gym outdoors using cargo containers because of COVID, so that we had indoor-outdoor workspace. It has a huge canopy over the top, this now, because it rains a lot in the Pacific Northwest. But we made it work, cut the sides out of a couple of the containers, put all our racks back outside, and now we actually use both spaces, which is great to have the indoor-outdoor space when we want it, and have multiple coaches that come and help, as well as volunteer coaches that we've trained to do strength training properly. In fact, the assistant strength coach at the University of Virginia left his job, a person of faith, left his job to come and work for us right before COVID hit. God bless him. And has become the program director there, and he's amazing. I think both his skill sets and everything else, but heard about what we were doing through a long set of stories. But anyway, and wanted to be out of D1 athletics, and this was a much better way to do ministry. Was taking some seminary classes and things like that. These are the two adult landscapers that work our landscape operation during the week, Cornelio and Santiago de Jesus Victoriano, which is spectacular, that their last name is Jesus the Victor. And they're brothers. They came during the pandemic. I came within 24 hours of thinking I had to shut down the landscaping company, and God provided. And these two folks have been fabulous, and they're going to benefit from this housing starting in July that's next to our church campus, which I'm really excited about. So they're a key part of our ministry. And then we just brought on an additional sort of crew boss, Luis Castillo, who's been a long-term friend of mine. I offered him this business 4 years ago, and he wasn't ready to take it, and he is now, and that's allowing me to step out of some of the landscaping that I've been doing for these last years. But that's basically what the Forge is. I don't think I had another meaningful stuff. Oh, this is our Last Supper thing from a couple years ago, when we gather around the table, eat pizza together, share about the impact that folks have had on each other. Adults and students. They tend to do the trainings really together, which has been spectacular, watching like 60-year-old, 65-year-old retirees talking about their goals for the year, along with like a 17-year-old teenager, is one of the most wonderful things you'll ever witness. We had a kid that was very cerebral from the schools, showed up, tech-based, and he, at this supper, one of the most powerful statements that I heard, there have been several, but he said, every other program I've been a part of in the community, I realized I've treated all the adults like a commodity. They're supposed to give me something. And he said, this is the only place that challenged me to see them as human beings too, which was pretty incredible to hear. So he'd been a real consumer of things, and that's our program. One of the women that's at the table here somewhere had worked in a lot of other programs, 4-H and other things, and kind of said, this feels different than those things, because it feels like you're trying to build community around this. And there are unique things that I think the gospel brings to this kind of work that we do. So that's the Forge in a nutshell.